Okay. How's everybody feeling?
I'm feeling nervous because you're going to...
I was going to pretend to say, like, tell me about your relationship with your mother. But we won't go there. Well, maybe not. Your Royal Highness, everyone in the room, it's an honor to be here, and I'm very excited to talk with you, Gareth. So we're going to start off talking about early childhood and then work our way into leadership. Sound okay?
Yep. Slow step. Let's take slow steps, see where we get to.
So I'm going to follow on to Professor Waldinger's research. So for the last, I'd say, 10 years or so, I've been doing research on what I call feelings mentors, looking at the people in our lives that give us what I call permission to feel as a child. And what I find is that only a third of people across the world report having had someone in their childhood that gives them permission to feel. Actually, and just as you know, I did a study here in England, it was 18%. So, respectfully, there's some work to do. And I'm just curious. I talk about the person who completely changed my life. He was my Uncle Marvin. He was a teacher and a band leader. And he came into my life at a very important time when I was experiencing quite a bit of trauma as a kid. And so, did you have a feelings mentor? Was there someone in your childhood, an aunt, an uncle, a parent, that gave you permission to feel?
Definitely. I mean, I had what I, at the time, considered a normal childhood. And it was only when I was learning to coach and we were taking qualifications on youth coaching that I heard this concept of attachment theory and the importance of that love that was talked about earlier, that bond with your parents at an early age. So I grew up, without knowing it and realising it, I grew up in an environment where I could fail, I could get things wrong, but that I had trust. And what I noticed with the players we worked with was lots of boys coming from backgrounds maybe both parents weren't around. Was much harder to build trust with them. You had to really earn that trust, and they were constantly checking you out and working out what you were trying to get out of them, what you were trying to take from them almost. So I was very fortunate to have that bond at the start.
So who was that? Who was your Uncle Marvin? As like,
well, so my parents in the beginning, but then in sport you're fortunate to have a coach all the time, and quite often that coach is going to be the most important person in a young person's life. Whether that's a Sunday football team or PE teacher, because it's somebody that they'll potentially open up to in a way that if they haven't got that opportunity at home. So I had a coach when I was 15, 16 years old who is still a mentor to me today. And why was that bond created? Well, he had belief in me. So it was supportive. He was prepared to challenge. So I think sometimes, we should make the point, this isn't just cuddly, warm, when we were working with talent, we had to challenge people, stretch them. But that was more possible if they knew it was a supportive environment. So with my players, I wanted to create an environment where they could fail. We would reflect and review why, but they felt supported. They could understand that we were working with them to make them the best they could be. And that's what I had as a young player, that, okay, this coach is telling me where I'm going wrong. I don't particularly like that message at this moment, but then I'd go away and reflect, and I knew it was coming from a good place.
So if you were to think about the attributes of this person, when you just take a moment and think back about your relationship, how would you describe them? What would be their top 3 traits or characteristics?
Well, he was definitely invested in developing young people. So he recognised that there's a point in his life where he was no longer the athlete. His job was to get the best out of other people. So how do we do that? How closely do we understand this person? What do we know about their family? What do we know about their ambitions, their intentions, because until you know and understand the motivations of the person you're working with, then it's very difficult to deal with them in the right way. So I, again, with my players, I would want to sit with them, I would want to chat with them. So much coaching doesn't happen on the training pitch. It would happen like this, with a cup of coffee. Tell me what's going on in your life. Once I met their parents, I had a pretty good idea why the boy was like he was. We were lucky, we had lots of good parents with our team. So definitely a desire to help young people progress, a belief in what was possible for young people, and prepared to listen.
Yeah.
I think we get clues from young people, and we're not necessarily trying to solve all their problems, because there's a risk I think we close them down, and that we stop their willingness to open up and take us into spaces where we might really be able to help them. But I don't know if that makes any logical sense to you from an academic perspective.
Well, it's your experience, so that's what matters. But what you're aligned with what the research shows. What we find in our research is that there are 3 core characteristics of these feelings mentors in our childhood. And by the way, we do this research in the workplace, and they're the same exact characteristics. Top 3, non-judgmental, good listener, who shows empathy and compassion. And so it just seems as if we're all desperate to be around people that have those characteristics, whether we're young children, whether we're in adolescence, or whether we're adults. Now, what's interesting is only a third of us, as I shared, say we had someone like that. Just take a moment yourselves. Did you have someone in your childhood? Was there an adult when you were growing up that created the conditions for you to be your true, full, feeling self? And oftentimes, I give these speeches, and someone recently said to me, Marc, I hated your presentation. I'm like, why is that? And he said, well, I didn't have an Uncle Marvin, and now I realize why I don't have purpose and meaning in life. And I was like, take a deep breath. And I think it's important to realize that not everyone has had it from the research, but it doesn't mean today can't be the first day that we can give ourselves that. We can be non-judgmental to ourselves. We can be good listeners to ourselves and show empathy and compassion. The other thing is that for people here, you talk about research. What we have now is research on this, and what we show is that people who had that person in their lives as adults, higher in emotional intelligence, better physical health, better mental health, they sleep better at night, and they have higher life satisfaction and purpose and meaning in life. So real positive, strong outcomes.
I could see all of that until you said they sleep well, so...
We can work on that
okay.
one. But one of the things that's most interesting to me is that even parents say that there are 3 barriers to being the Uncle Marvin to their own children. And also, I work with sports teams as well and leaders in companies. The first is time. People say, I don't have time to do this. The second is fear. And the third is people don't feel prepared or skilled. One thing about the skill piece is that what we show in our research is that no one is saying brilliant or problem solver or fixer. So what is your advice to all the people in the audience here when people say, I don't have time for this kind of coaching, or I don't have time for this kind of connection?
Well, I think for all leaders, time is the greatest enemy. And I think we have to then prioritize where we spend that time. So I think across any industries, technical detail is different, but fundamentally we're trying to get the best out of people. And so, how do you, maybe you've got to think about, okay, I can't affect everybody in my business, but the next level of leaders, how do I affect them and empower them so that goes through the business? And that requires time. Yeah. And I think time invested in making our people the best version of themselves will be the most valuable. People want to come, people don't just come to work to earn money. They want to develop, they want fulfillment, they want to feel that they're contributing. It struck me as we're talking here, where might we go with investment on early? I spent years learning to coach. I spent years learning football. Probably the most important role I've had in my life is parenting 2 kids, and I probably read 2 books on it. So why would we be the experts? And have we got to think in society about how do we help people to understand their role as parents, the importance of it? Because research is telling us so many boys in difficulty in particular. I've been studying boys more than girls, but it will apply to both. Coming from fatherless families, are people realising the impact of that when they're making the decisions they are in those early years? So I think there are lots of areas where we can have an impact, and I think people are very conscious of the problems we're inheriting. When people come to work now, young footballers, their skills are developed between 5 and 11. We know that. So their emotional skills are developed earlier, I'm sure, but their technical skills in our world are developed between 5 and 11. So the product, horrible word, the product we get through the door, we can't affect.
Right.
So when we were looking at youth football, we were trying to put rules in place to affect 5 to 11s. We would never see the benefit of that. So as leaders, there are things here we're talking about that we might not receive the benefit of directly, but we have to put things in place that help children, help people develop for the future.
Nice. Let's jump into the skills a little bit. So I work at a university that is not known for its emotional intelligence, right? Nobody gets in because of their high EQ. They get in because of their test scores and their letters of recommendation. They play sports I never even heard of. Truthfully, it's fascinating. And I always tell my students that your IQ got you in, but your EQ gets you out. And they don't love that. But I do believe it's true. And having worked with a lot of leaders in many companies, I'm looking now at these glass windows, and I'm remembering this meeting I had with the CEO of a very famous hedge fund. And he looked at me and he goes, "Marc, look at me. Do you think I really need emotional intelligence?" And I said, "Well, I just interviewed the 5 people who work for you, and they don't like their jobs. So you might want to think about it." So I'm curious. One of the master skills of emotional intelligence is emotion regulation. That ability to manage our emotions in the toughest times. I cannot imagine some of the toughest emotions and experiences you've had as a player, as a coach. And I'm really curious, what are your thoughts about regulating emotions, and what are your go-to strategies for yourself when you're feeling, that sense of failure or that anxiety?
I think you're trying to remind yourself that there has to be a self-sacrifice as a leader, in that I think sometimes people are worried about their own reputation being threatened. So the team lose, you lose face. I see this at Sunday morning football with kids. The coach of an under-10s, his week's ruined because his under-10s team have lost. It's really not the most important thing. So you've got to remind yourself that your job is to handle all the emotions of the team, to try and help them understand why they've lost, to keep their confidence high. So again, we're back to how do we provide support.
But before we go there, I want to know your personal strategies.
Yep.
How do you wake up in the morning if you're feeling anxious or you failed? How do you rethink that? What is your strategy?
So my own well-being, I recognize my energy is critical. So where do I get energy and space to think? I exercise. It's basics, really. Sleep, good nutrition, limiting alcohol. Right, when we were in a tournament, I wouldn't drink because I knew that would affect my sleep. So
that's the biology piece.
Yep.
I'm curious now about the psychology piece.
But I think that helped me to maintain a clarity of thought and a strength of feeling. And then simple breathing techniques. I knew as a player when I was anxious that simple breathing techniques would bring me down to a level that I felt more control, and just almost like a centering feeling. So I had those skills and feelings from being a player that I was able to carry with me. I
Sure.
didn't just develop that at 45 years old. I've
Right.
been developing those small steps all the way along. Little bits more pressure, more rejection, more failure, more things wrong, but building resilience from those things that in the end you become more comfortable in your own skin.
But let me just pause for a minute. So you're playing, you fail, your team fails, you're having strong feelings, and you can take a deep breath, and like, we still failed. So what do you do in your mind to support you in managing emotions?
Yeah, but when I was younger, I'd have been catastrophizing. So how do I missed a very famous penalty 30 years ago. That night and the nights afterwards, I was thinking, how do I ever recover from this?
Yeah.
You know, this is a public humiliation.
Right.
I've failed to execute a skill under pressure in front of half the world.
Yes.
So I didn't know where I was heading with that. But step by step, day by day, working through, okay, well, I've got to go out and face people, interact with people. Actually, you know, I can still do most of the things that I'm required to do in my job, slowly taking small steps towards recovering your confidence, really. So I think it's always small steps and reflection and speaking, you know, human connection, human stories. So talking to people that had been through similar situations.
Yep.
I was fortunate that I had some teammates that had been in that situation, so they could talk me through what they'd lived through, how it affected them, what might come further down the line. But you can get through this.
Yeah.
You know,
So social support.
Definitely.
There's a term in psychology for young children which is never worry alone. And I think as adults we should not have to worry alone either. We all could use that support system, getting advice, perspective. And it sounds like that's one of your go-tos.
Well, I had a brilliant team of people around me. So it was interesting talking about loneliness of a leader. I mean, that can be the case. But I think if you've got a strong team around you that you're prepared to open up to and share your feelings with and share your fears, that's not always an easy place to go to because, you know, my generation were brought up probably not to show vulnerability and not to think about doing those things. But once you share those issues, I think people relate to it.
Yeah.
And they want to help, you know, and then you've suddenly got a whole team of people that are together in how they're feeling and they feel they can share a little bit more. So I think you've got to role model those things as a leader because people will be reluctant to show that vulnerability to their boss.
Yeah. You've
got to constantly give them permission. There's this, even if you feel you're not creating it, there's this hierarchy that exists.
Correct.
And I knew I had to constantly reassure people that work with me that they could give me critical feedback, that they could suggest other alternatives to things we were doing. So I spent a lot of time working through that.
Let's jump into what we'll call co-regulation, meaning how we support other people in dealing with their feelings. So I'm just having a memory now. I hired someone to help me run my center a number of years ago who came from Wall Street. And after about a month, he looked at me and he goes, "How much time do I have to spend talking to everybody about their feelings?" And I said, "A lot more than you're used to." He's like, "In Wall Street, I just, you know, someone was difficult, I would just give them more money." I'm like, "It doesn't work that way at the university." So I'm curious, you know, having been a coach or, you know, managing teams, how do you deal with the co-regulation piece with the players who, you know, someone, you know, fails, they have shame, they have embarrassment, their fear, the rest of the team is kind of disrupted by that oftentimes. What's your approach to working as a leader and helping other people?
Yeah, there are different stages to that because there are times you'd speak to the whole group because you needed to make sure, you know, in the middle of a tournament, for example, they are in a bubble. There's all this external noise from the media. So keeping the emotions of the group on track, keeping the belief of the group on track was very important. So, you know, after every game, I would get yes, we've got 26 players, but we had a staff of 70.
Mm-hmm.
So they're also feeding off each other's emotions and
Yeah.
doubts and questions, and they're reading and listening that the manager doesn't know what he's doing. So how do we keep all that on track? So keeping perspective for them. Look, we're still in this tournament. We might not be playing well, but these are the things we're doing really well, and these are the targets, and let's keep our focus. And then there are the individual conversations where recognising a player that hasn't been selected, that's a difficult space to be, because I've been that player that wasn't selected. So I would have appreciated a coach just explaining, you're not in the team, but you're delivering so much for us because you're supporting everybody else, you're training really well. So I'm recognising them doing something well. Again, when we were going through our youth courses, one of our tutors said, catch young people doing things well, because it's easy to find people doing things wrong and to jump on it and to question their behaviours. But if you reinforce positive contributions, it's so much more powerful, and then you can hold people up as a standard bearer for the others. So the others kind of go, oh, well, they're getting praised because they're training well and they're committed to the team. So if I'm a little bit more selfish and sulking, and then I'm not getting that praise. And I've found that worked better than constantly admonishing people for poor behaviours. So, and then just recognising, even our biggest players, they're under enormous pressure. So they're expected to deliver. If they're not delivering, recognising that, look, I can see this is a difficult period for you, and you're a very normally a low maintenance person, but I've got to make sure I don't just think that you're going to get on with things all the time and not have doubts and insecurities, because even our top best players had huge insecurities. Yeah. I wish I'd known this when I was playing. I'd have been so much better player.
I'm feeling a little insecure right now, just so you know. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, or actually I'm just going to share first, was that, we often talk about empathy as something, you have a misfortune, somebody passes in your family, or there's something negative that happens, and you show your empathy and compassion. But what we show in our research is something interesting, which is that there's something called positive empathy, which is how we help other people embellish or further savor their pleasant emotions and experiences. Like when there's a win, and you just spend a little extra time with that person. And what the research shows longitudinally, especially for children, is that when they reflect on their childhoods, they remember less the traditional empathy, and they remember more this positive empathy, that person who just made them feel really good. But then there's resistance that people think, oh, that's, too much attention to people's positivity and experiences. How do you feel about that?
I think there's a danger we don't celebrate success.
Yeah.
So, we're always working towards the next thing, and actually when individuals do well or the team does well, taking a moment to pause and recognise people, and that can be just a thank you.
Yeah.
I think I've worked with leaders who didn't often find it in themselves to say thank you. Yeah. And that means such a lot to people that work with you. So, it's a long treadmill of churning out things if we're not going to recognise moments where individuals are successful, or there's a promotion, or the team have delivered something. And I can understand why, because again, as the leader, you feel like you've got to refocus them. In our world, we've won a game, we've got another game, I've got to get them psychologically not loose and not switching off. But we've got to give people time to enjoy what we've been working towards. So finding that right balance. And I used to check in with other people in my team, again, around that sort of thing, because they were better at seeing those things. We're not the expert in every area as a leader. So who are the people that we need a social event? I'm not the guy to organise the social event. I'm going to flipping well enjoy it when it's going on. Yeah. But I'm not the one to organise it. So actually having people with different responsibilities, with a different lens on all these areas, I think it's about diversity of your team in terms of their thinking as well.
Nice.
And I think that's very important.
So as we wrap, I'm going to make one request, which is I share with you the 3 characteristics: non-judgment or non-judgmental, empathy and compassion, and good listening. So maybe you can all set a goal for which one of these attributes you're going to cultivate over the next couple of days, weeks, years, rest of your life. And Gareth, for you, if there was one skill that you could say every leader in this room needs to cultivate, what would be the one that you'd want to leave them with in terms of thinking about?
Well, I just think this idea of how do we get the best out of each individual person, and recognising, when I was younger, our bosses were treat everybody the same, and that just doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's background is different. What motivates them is different. Their purpose for coming to work is different. So I think again, I go back to you have to understand your people to be able to get the best out of them, and they'll give you so much more if you invest that time in them, and you'll be able to get far more out of them if you recognise why we did personality profiling on all of the team. Oh, okay, now I understand why he behaves that way in certain moments under pressure, and it just helped me understand as the leader, but it helped the group understand, because they're all thinking, why is that player being an idiot at this moment in our head? Okay, that's the way he's wired. So it helped us bond as a team. And
So get to know your people and build positive relationships.
Definitely.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.